Now that you've learned about the fundamentals of data binding, let's talk more about the directives that make that happen, and also talk about some other directives along the way, as well as more details on data binding expressions. So directives simply teach HTML new tricks. That's their goal in life. Really what they can be used to do ranges from DOM manipulation to events and much more, and we'll look at that in just a moment. But I like to think of them as little building blocks that, when put together in views, can be used to ultimately render the data in the browser that you want to show the end user. Now, they're a really key part of AngularJS. In fact, you've already seen the ng app directive and that it's very, very important to mark an app as an Angular app. And you've even seen some others like ng model for the data binding, but there's a whole bunch of other directives you can use. Now, you can think of directives as little Lego blocks that can be put together to perform a variety of different functions and build an application. They can do all kinds of things ranging from DOM manipulation to working with data binding. We can reference modules and controllers using directives, handle events, modify CSS, and even determine where views are loaded into the shell page. Now, there's even more that you can do, but starting out, these are some of the key areas that you'll probably want to know about and work with as you use directives in your AngularJS apps. Now, here's some examples of some of these categories and some of the AngularJS directives that you can use in your views. So in the DOM manipulation area here, you'll see that we have ng hide and show, and I'll show some demonstrations of different variations of these coming up throughout this module. But ng hide and show kind of do what the name implies. They can show or hide different content. ng repeat can be used to iterate through content and, for instance, write out a bulleted list. ng view can be used to determine where a given view loads in the shell page. Now, when it comes to data binding, you've already seen the ng model, but there's a few others you can use. ng init can be used to initialize your properties with some initial values. And then ng bind can be used in place of data binding expressions, which we're going to be learning about as well here. Now, you can also reference modules or just mark an app as an AngularJS app using the ng app directive, which we've already seen briefly in the first module of the course. And later, as we talk more about controllers, you'll see there's an important directive for associating the brain, the controller, with a view so that at runtime, that view knows which controller to use to get its data. You can also handle events such as click events or key press events or even mouse enter events, and then there's even others you can handle. And keep in mind that this is just a small subset of the directives, and these are built into Angular, but there's also a lot of third-party directives you can get either through some third-party providers that sell them or through open source projects. Now, when it comes to defining and using directives, you can actually use them in multiple ways. It depends on the directive and how it's been defined and modeled. First off, most directives are used as attributes. And so you've already seen this in the earlier demonstration I showed in the beginning of the course. But ng hide, for instance, which we'll see a demo coming up shortly here, it can actually bind to a property, in this case is hidden, to determine if a div should be shown or hidden. You can also add data dash on front of these if you'd like. In fact, in my more real-life type of apps, I like to add the data dash attributes because if you do run your view or your HTML code against an HTML validator, or you use it in editors that pick up errors, most editors, they don't really like it when you do these custom attributes like this, but they're okay if you use the HTML5 data dash attributes. So I prefer the data dash, but it really just depends on what you like, and either way will work. Now, some of these directives can also be used not only as attributes, but also as tags. So AngularJS directives, really, as I mentioned earlier, they teach HTML new tricks, and that includes even adding custom tags into your views, into your HTML pages. And as a result of doing that, you can add in custom functionality that might be a big table that gets output, or some other type of advanced functionality, and all you add is a simple tag. Behind the scenes, it kicks in all this advanced functionality. Now, ng view is actually used as a type of marker to load our single page application views into the shell page. We got to load those somewhere. So this is a directive that kind of marks where those views would go in the page. Now, there's other ways you can use them. You can even define directives using comments, and that's kind of a unique approach you won't see a lot, but it is possible. and you can even define them using the standard class. I'm not a huge fan of that approach, but that is another option you might come across. Most directives, though, they're actually defined using attributes or tag names. Now, when it comes to data binding, we've already seen an example of a data binding expression. And here's an example of 1 plus 1, which should obviously yield 2. And what it uses is some binding markup, and that's the squiggly brackets you see here, and then an expression. Now, the expression normally is going to be maybe a property name or an object dot property name that you want to actually write out in the page. But you can also do simple expressions as well, such as 1 plus 1, you could do division or multiplication. What you can't do is more involved logic. Business logic shouldn't go in the view. The view really should just be the output of the data, and the business logic should have already happened, typically in the controller or maybe in some of the other behind-the-scenes objects that Angular provides. But you can do some simple math calculations and a few other things. I use them the most, though, for actually writing out values into a page. So let's go ahead and jump into some demonstrations of a few of the different directives you can use, and also talk about data binding expressions and how they can be used in your AngularJS applications.